Excited to have Rabbi Yitz close his ears for a moment. The sole father of our progressive Orthodox movement, absolutely, the father of the B'Tselem Elokim movement, the father of our Jewish pluralism, the father of our understanding of what to do with power, what to do with Jewish power in the 20th and 21st century, who has really been doing the work, I say with a lot of humility, been doing the work all of us have been looking to have happen for many, many decades, and has done the academic work and the activist work and the community building work. And this is a tikkun, because 52 years ago, as Rabbi pointed out, 52 years ago, the YU commentator, Rabbi Yitz, was addressing sex ethics before anyone was ready to address it. And they tried to bring a shochet out and try to puzzle Rabbi Yitz, but Baruch Hashem, it's not possible. So we have Tchias Amesim. we have the tikkun to reimagine sex ethics, and a lot has changed in 50 years. So they tell me. But this is a wonderful opportunity to explore a modern Orthodox approach to sex ethics in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming our keynote, Rabbi Dr. Yitz Greenberg.
Just so you know that it was like touching the third rail. And the truth is, I didn't deal with it again publicly for another 50 years. So just to know everybody's got their limits. And we all got a little touch of cowardice, and it's very important for us to. Anyway, at least at the time I concluded it wasn't going to get anywhere. There was no point in pursuing it because it's just going to remove. It didn't help anyway. They removed the influence anyway. But I mean, it was just understand. Part of the challenge, in fact, that's a good introduction to what my session will be about. Because my session really, I'm not so much going to try to provide a sexual ethic as suggest that one of the directions in which we have to move toward a sexual ethic, and this is frankly an attempt to put before my colleagues, my people who will be the future poskim of this community, people who will be rabbis, future or present rabbis of the community, and the community itself, members, because in the end, they're the group that will decide what's acceptable, absorbable in this community and what's not. So it's a long way ahead, but so it's frankly an attempt to think aloud with you about it. I say toward a modern Orthodox sexual ethic because at the present time there is a social sexual ethic in this community, but it's not modern Orthodox. It's Haredi, frankly. It's a community that assumes, or at least officially, this is what, if you go ask a rabbi, or if you go to your yeshiva, or not your Maharat, but your equivalent means, what will they teach you? Well, the answer is officially, the official position is that men and women do not mix regularly and continuously in social setting in the country. They should be kept separate as much as possible. Secondly, there is no physical contact between them before marriage. Right? Again, when I grew up in the shiur world, no one thought of it, but shomer negiah had become a sort of a major. What shomer negiah means literally that I will not even shake a hand of a woman before marriage. Yichud, one is not allowed to be alone with a woman, presumably because it can or will lead to sexual indiscretion or sexual activity. Kol isha erva, a woman's voice, particularly a singing voice, carries with it erotic arousal. Therefore, one should not be exposed to it, or one should not involve in it. I mean, as you may have read the story in the papers about 6 months ago, a group of soldiers, and again, one of the pride and joys of the national religious community in Israel is that our sons and daughters have become really major and important part of the army and its superiority and its strength. But a group, there was a military ceremony and a women's choir sang, and a group of soldiers walked out because they felt it was a violation of halakha for them to be listening to singing women's voices. So as I say, this is the official position. If you ask the Israeli rabbinate, or if you ask your Rosh Yeshiva, or if you ask official, again, I don't know what people say privately, and I certainly don't say it, but this is what you will hear if you ask for a formal statement before you emphasize its practice of banishment as a synagogue movement. That's basically the policy, and that's the official position that you ask, that's what you say. Now, my point is that this is not jive in any way, in any serious way, with the actual practice and reality of the modern Orthodox community, where women and men are in constant contact and meet frequently, both in school and in college and in work and in the public sector. Our women in this community are, in fact, profoundly expected, not just asked to, but expected to become professional, to take graduate studies, to develop and go into all these areas. So they're not going to be private, they're not going to be in the home, they're going to be in public, they're going to be in public work and activity. Our community, to the extent that it still upholds its own values, has co-education, there are many schools that have separated, but that's under the pressure of the movement and the dominance of Haredi authority in our community. The Kol-Isha, again, if women's voice in conversation, let alone in singing, again, if in fact in our community the very fact that a woman is singing or is talking is a problem in erotic arousal and things of that sort, of course it makes a good deal of the normal activity in the community and in professional life almost impossible. So again, to some extent, the answer, of course, is that people are ignoring the official policy, they're just simply what they're doing. But I want to point by saying, if you're talking about an ethic has to work in the actual reality of people's lives. Otherwise, you're not living by that ethic. In fact, it's not an ethic. I would say in many ways, this is the tragedy of the whole Orthodox community. In essence, right now, there is no sexual ethic. There is, the solution is they shouldn't have any opportunity to have any sexual contact. But we're talking ethic, this is a society in which sexuality has not only come to the fore, but I want to affirm this in a positive way. It has become much more culturally understood that sexuality is not only a fundamental human experience, an expression of my humanity, expression of my personal character, of my values in my life, but it's a community that looks to express itself. In other words, that it sees sexuality not as a necessary evil to have children, which is Joseph Caro's basic position, or does not see sexuality as something to be controlled and tightly controlled because it's threatening and it's dangerous and it leads to bad places. That, in a sense, is, so that's not where we are, but that's exactly what the official position. So again, we come back to the question, in this society where there has been a fantastic and impressive exploration of the joy of sex, of the possibility that this is in fact a powerful personal expression of my own dignity and value. I mean, the whole point of women saying that it's my body, it's a statement of dignity for me to show it, and you can't, and this is the cross tension that breaks it right there. And you can't claim that she had a miniskirt, that's why I raped her. Because the statement of dignity is that my body is my body. And yes, you notice me, in part, that's a statement I'm here, when I used to be invisible, I used to be in back, or no one saw it. Now you see me. Again, the tension again, I'm not simply to celebrate, because part of the expression and development of sexual expressiveness, for example, like in all these matters, it gets out of control, or it goes beyond reasonable or human or humane standards, and it becomes promiscuous, it becomes, this is the society to hook up where people, there's a serious claim out there that it's not in any way an emotional or values expression, it's simply an expression of a physical activity like you go to gym. And since it has no other freight, no other emotional freight, but the activity, it's an activity and casually, promiscuously, I can do it irrelevantly without not even paying attention to it, because it's not really a significant statement of anything beyond that moment itself. So again, it's a good example where the opening up and the freedom leads to a kind of a loss of any sense of the direction, value, or control, which I would argue with. But my point is, they come together. That's why I need a sexual ethic. But it's an ethic that should be regulating expressiveness, that should be exploring how could you have, again, if I quote a classic line, Kadosh Tiyu, be holy, which you will recall, Rashi quotes it in Ramban, the very famous Ramban, that means becoming holy, kadesh atzmo b'mutorah. Be holy in the things that are permitted. What does it mean to be holy in the things that are permitted? So again, unfortunately, Ramban, which is a classic medieval, tries to say, well, that means pushing through. It means that even though it's permitted, you should restrict it. But I would argue that this society is claiming, and I think it's a very serious religious claim that should be explored by our community, which is make yourself holy and that is permitted, meaning how do you turn the permitted activity into something that really connects to God, to the image of God of the other person, to the depth of connection to beyond ourselves in the activity itself. In other words, how does making love, how does having a better sexual technique express itself in the form of a greater holiness or a greater, that's what this society is raising an issue. Now again, you can answer, maybe the answer is no, but I would argue the community has a responsibility if it wants to shape this society, if it wants to influence, if it wants to stand for something that's going to have to deal with these questions, and I would argue it should deal positively rather than negatively. Now the final point of this introduction, which is too long already, which is of course the point being, the official position of our community is that there's no sex outside of marriage. And again, I'm not unsympathetic to the idea. I think what they're trying to say, or what the official position is trying to say, is that sexuality is not casual. It is human, it is a basic need and a basic expression of humanity, but it also has a lot of power. It's not, it has a lot of intensity, it's a lot of emotional and a personal impact far beyond the act itself. You should take it seriously. And if the ideal, and this is what the ideal is trying to say, if the ideal is that it's an expression of love and it's an expression of commitment, the intercourse is the ultimate expression because you have a kind of a total physical response of one person to another. Literally a total physical response, which is emotionally and mentally, you're totally in the situation that moment. Then that should be a moment where this other person is truly in the image of God, is truly unique, is truly a person that's directly and fully, this is the person. You recall the Yosef Karo's line in the Shulchan Aruch that one should not have intercourse and have this person and have a mental image of somebody else in bed with them. It's part of the idea. So I understand that. So the idea that you have to be married is a way of saying this should be experienced so serious and so committed that really it takes what's marriage, that you know the other person not just loves you, but they're committed to you. You know that they know your weaknesses and they still accept you. You know 1,000 examples of that. So that's what they're trying to say by saying it's no sexuality outside of marriage. What it doesn't come to grips with, of course, is the two flip sides. One flip side, of course, is that because you have that doesn't guarantee that in that moment, nevertheless, even though you have commitment, you have love, you have dependability, you have all those good qualities, no guarantee that nevertheless, at this moment, that person is in fact, or your partner, your spouse, is in fact tuned in and totally focused on you and totally focused on the relationship and totally feeling you, trying to know you, trying to know literally you in this full sense. And the other flip side, of course, that you come to grips with, what about the less intense forms, or what about the reality of single life? I'll come back to that. So right now, the official position is within marriage, but my argument is because of the failure to develop an ethic within marriage, I think it is much less expressive and much less affirmative than it can and should be. In other words, to some extent, now again, I have no proof that I haven't done a serious survey of the total honest community, but of course, over a lifetime, you have counseling and you have personal contacts and you talk to people and you get a sense of it. I would argue that there's been a kind of a halo effect in which, even within marriage, sexuality is either restricted or limited, or people are certainly not fully comfortable with the idea that this is something one would explore or try to develop at a deeper level or try to make even more expressive. So what's my alternative? So my alternative, of course, is to argue that here's an opportunity for the modern Orthodox community. It's an opportunity to make Torah, as halacha, central, relevant, not only in dealing with one of the fundamental life experiences, which, after all, it is fundamental and it is powerful and it is central, but also give a guide to a society which on the one hand, as I said, feels and is proud of the fact that there have been breakthroughs, and part of the sexual freedom, of course, is the affirmation of women's dignity and equality. Again, it can be a negative form. I have a right to be equally promiscuous, but it could be a positive form of, yes, the woman is not, the assumption is not that the woman, if a man has all the sexual urges and the woman has not. There's a whole bunch of ways in which this is really a statement of women's dignity and affirmative. And on the other hand, the society itself doesn't know what the limit or what the direction is or what the control. There's a lot of complaints about loss of intensity, loss of meaning, loss of faithfulness, loss of meaning. So my point is, here's an opportunity to make a major contribution and to be influential as well as straighten out your own hair. So what do I propose? What I propose is, the answer is, A, we try to think through some of the specific grounds on which Jewish tradition or our tradition places sexuality and grows it and see where it comes from. If we can recover the basic ground and then say, can we articulate an ethic that in fact guides it, makes it both physically expressive and physically pleasurable, and at the same time gives it the weight that we have classically given to it, which is that it's a profound union of man and woman, that it's a spiritual and human, fully embrace of the other person. It's not just a temporary interaction. So I go back to my standard cliches. Thank you very much, Ashley. I think we'd start with Tzedem Elokim. And as you will recall by now, the fundamental claim or teaching is that Tzedem Elokim means that every human being is an image of God. That's what the Torah says. So men and women, and that this state of being an image of God brings with it, you're born with three intrinsic dignities, and this is what you're entitled to in terms of treatment by society: the infinite value, beyond money, infinite value of every individual, equality, and uniqueness. In other words, this is a dignity which you are born with simply by being human. And that means white or black, man or woman. You have the same dignity of equality, the same dignity of uniqueness. The catch, not the catch, is, however, the tradition also makes a very important point, which I think has to be kept in mind. That's what you're born with, but do you know it? Do you realize it? Do you live it out? The answer is, and maybe not. And of course, the crucial point is, the society has a profound influence. If I grew up as an African American in America in the 19th century, the message of the society is you're not infinitely valuable. You could be bought and sold, and we have a price for you, but it's nowhere near that. You're not equal because your skin is black, and therefore you are inferior. And one could go on and on. And the society, by its attitude, and the family, and the community, by its attitude, therefore can suppress or minimize, reduce this dignity. Again, my claim is that the whole point is that God loves everybody, so everybody should feel infinitely valuable, equally unique. Because if you have love, if you experience love, at least that's the way I experienced it. Who in my life is infinitely valuable? It took me some time to realize the answer is the people that I love. Otherwise there's a limited amount of money I will spend to help you, no matter how generous I am. But if I love you, I'd give away my last penny. How many people in my life are truly equal? Here again, I mean, I'm smarter than, I'm richer than, I'm more powerful than, whatever. But the answer again is, if someone I love, that all becomes absolutely irrelevant. And I really feel a genuine equality, at best, and equality, rather superiority and uniqueness. Now, I start with that. So the tradition says, it's not just that you're born with these dignities, but that the family must treat you accordingly, that you yourself become and realize these dignities as you act accordingly. In other words, if the family raises you lovingly and treats you like your life is invaluable, then you will feel that and become that. If your school or if your community looks upon you as unique, and they really work at it, and they listen to you, and they make room for you, and they give you creative expression, then you become unique. And if, on the other hand, the community is tone deaf or presses you into conformity rather than unity, or presses you or treats you like you're second class because you women are second class in much of the Orthodox community, or not all this community. So the point is that after a while you internalize and you become accepting of that. So the challenge becomes, in order for you to realize it's Elohim, you have to grow up, A, being loved, and B, practicing love toward other people. So in other words, or put another way, in order for you to fully realize that Elohim, you have to grow up and become capable of friendship, from friendship to relationship, which is more intense relationships, more intense friendship, and of course, one of the ultimate possibilities is to become so committed and so fulfilled and so related with the person that you really want to spend your lifetime with. Or rather, you turn the love into a commitment or a covenant. That's what marriage really is. It's a deed. And that's the act of full Tzelem Elokim. And that's the truth behind my argument. That's why, yes, sex in marriage has the greatest possible chance of realizing this total intensity, where I know that's the language, of course, that we talk about sexuality when it's done right, when it's done ideally, to know the other person in all their fullness of value and all the equality and all the needs. Now, how do I become more deeply related? How do I become a better friend? How do I become truly the one who knows the other? The answer, obviously, is communication. There's no other way. Because I'm me and you're you, so we talk. You communicate, and I get to know you, and I get to know what's unique about you, I get to know what's valuable, what's precious about you, and vice versa, okay? Now, here's my first point, and it's on the sex question. This communication between us can be verbal or non-verbal, and it's an extremely central truth that when I want to connect to somebody, I do want to express it, not just verbally, but non-verbally. Now again, non-verbally can be a hug, it can be a kiss, it can be shaking hands, it can be 100 other things. But that is part of the process of coming to know the other person, and it's part of the process of loving the other person. So what's the test of communication that I have to live up to if I want to get to communication that will truly help this person become a Elohim and help me become or realize my Elohim? So I think there are 4 criteria. One is the truth, meaning when I say I love you, I mean it. When I say to you, when I hug you, which is without words, what am I saying when I hug you? I really feel for you, I feel friendship for you, I feel deeply about you. So it should be truthful. Because you could do that, and it's not. And more than once, we've all had that experience. Sometimes you fake it, and not necessarily for a good reason, but whatever. Shaking hands, hugging, kissing, these become part of the statement all the way up to intercourse itself. That I really am non-verbally communicating, I really have emotional feelings for you, I really am in a relationship with you, I'm really part of the interplay between us that's really not just casual, but really hits me on a very deep personal level. So one is truth, the other is that these actions, or words, or in this case physical, are in the process of building a relationship. So it's not just that it exists, the fact that I hug you, the fact that I shake hands with you, builds up a confidence of a feeling. I like this person, they like me. I feel in their friendship, I feel in their outreach to me physically, they're communicating the same message. So true, or I would call authentic communication, the fulfillment of that is one is that they say that it's truthful, and secondly that it's building a relationship, it's uncovering, it's deepening in me as well as in the other person the capacity for a relationship. Thirdly, and this is a Jewish ideal, that it's capable of growing and maturing. And now, I'm not going to end up with total commitment to every person in my life, every friend, but it's capable of intensifying and growing. And yes, in the case of Yahudut, you have this idea that it's at least with one person, it's possible to develop it so deeply that it becomes covenantal or committed. What's committed means? Number one, as I said, it's a shift from no matter how much I love you, it's not the same as I love you so much that I'm willing mentally, emotionally, to spend my whole life with you. And think of what that implies. Right now, you're young, you're beautiful, you're whatever, you're famous, and I want to associate with it. But that means, by saying it this way, I know that means when you're, in your 80s and when you're struggling and when you've lost your money or lost your fame, I'm saying I'm ready for that. This love is so personal now. It's it's no longer dependent on this particular quality that attracted you in the first place. You're witty, you're intelligent. I enjoy that very much. Yes, that's what attracted me. But you know what? I now realize that even if you didn't have that, I'd still want to be with you. Again, it turns out in many cases this is an idealistic thing and it's not real, and the real doesn't work that way. But nevertheless, the point is to have that capacity to grow in that direction. That's one of the measures of realizing the full image of God. And fourthly, and last but not least, of course, Jewish traditionalists insist we're part of a chain of life. We are not just simply personal. We are part of a chain of a covenant which is trying to tikkun olam for the perfected world, and therefore, A, I have to do it in my lifetime, but B, since I may not get there in my lifetime, I have to be part of the chain of life and create family and precedent. So it doesn't stop with me, but it keeps going until. So those are the criteria that make for, I'd say, a framework of faith and meaning and purpose behind communication, including, as I said, sexuality. Now, so again, now, let me take for a moment the model that is, we're talking about sexuality in marriage itself. It turns out, and this to me is what fascinating about it, it turns out we say, so what's the Torah, or at least what's the tradition? And frankly, the Tanakh, Torah Shabbat, Torah Chamisha Chumshei Torah, not clear to me. The ethic is very developed. I mean, I cling to the two most wonderful models, which is that Zachor and Nekeva, both men and women, had son of a kin. I cling to this magnificent statement, Lo Tov Heyo Son Levato, that to be a full human being, you can't grow as a monad. You have to grow with relationship and family and community. And I love them. I love both these statements. And I love Shir HaShirim, which has again the courage to include a highly specific, highly erotic, highly physical imagery in the tradition, not only to celebrate love and sexual love at that, but then to turn it and use it as the highest paradigm and model of how we relate to God. I mean, to me, that's the greatness. It certainly makes sexuality a very significant, holy, if you will, sacred activity. That's the good news. The bad news is, it's quite clear that the Torah more or less, at the same time, accommodates the culture and the values around it. Thus, for example, again, when a father can sell his daughter. Now, again, it's a big improvement over the previous situation, which is that anybody could sell any woman. So it's good to know that we've restricted it so the father can marry the daughter, and he can sell it to marriage, into marriage. Now, of course, as I say, the good news is that once he buys her, he has to treat her like a free woman. For the moment, I'm going to stipulate that is what the original Pshat, not just Torah Shabbat, but even so. My point is the Torah really made, or for example, the laws of rape. Right? Before we get to rape, if they have intercourse and she's a virgin, not yet married, basically the Torah seems to say, well, he pays the father the penalty of virginity. So it's not, as I say, it's not clear to me that we have here a systematic conceptual statement of what the ethic really is. Well, so what is the ethic? So as I say, I think the ethic is built on it. That's Torah is not this is in general, the Torah is not a one-shot deal. It's part of a chain, the Torah Shabbat, and the Torah Shabbat does build on this structure by saying, it's talking about relationship, about commitment, it's talking about, those are things which the Torah Shabbat brings out in much greater depth. But in the end, when you get to total marriage and total intercourse, it turns out when you look at the Shulchan Aruch, which of course is reflecting both the Gemara and the Rambam, there are two traditions. It's the old joke about, what's the official position when they ask the Shaila, what's the Torah's view of this view, what's the correct answer?
There's lots of answers.
What's that?
There's lots of answers. I said there's lots of answers.
Well, the answer is two rabbis disagree. I mean, that's the point, or at least two rabbis disagree. So it turns out in this case, and I put it before you, I won't read all the details because my time is almost up here. I got carried away here, but if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, on the one hand you have Rabbi Yosef Karo, and again, he's quoting Rambam, and Rambam is quoting the Gemara. He should not, if he is married, notice, he should not be excessively familiar, ragil, with his wife, but rather in the frequency stated in the Torah. Now that's interesting. Because Rabbi Yosef Karo is saying what? That even if you're married, you should not have sex more often than Ona. What's the catch there? The catch, of course, Ona is a minimum, but he has made it into a maximum. Okay, said it, and so on. Again, he's trying to deal with. Even if he's with her, he should not intend his own pleasure. Sex is not about pleasure. It's like a person meeting his obligation, because it is required by Jewish law to satisfy his wife sexually. And so on and so forth. Or what other permitted, if his intention is to restrain himself in order not to lust and do something sinful, as when he sees his urges getting stronger, etc., etc. So basically, what you see Rabbi Yosef Karo is, it's a whole tradition, of course, not just Rabbi Karo. Sex is dangerous, it's a constant threat, it's a constant challenge, and men and women in their interaction, frequently there is a great danger that these irrational and irrepressible impulses will override reason, will override proper ethics, will override the halacha. And so therefore you have to treat it with constant restriction. In fact, he quotes it, there is an organ in the person which if you starve it, it's satisfied, and if you satisfy it, it gets hungry. Meaning again, that the best way to handle sex is to keep it to an absolute minimum, and of course it goes on about that. Now if you read verse 7, paragraph 7, in case you can be less happy, basically he accepts the Gemara that suggests, at least one person said that when he had sex, he was like, in the moment of intercourse, he was overcome by a demon. Put it in contemporary language, not so nice. Wham, bam, thank you, man. And the point was quickly, 1, 2, 3, out. There's no, and he goes into that. One should not look to extend the foreplay because that's pleasure and that's not sex. One should be looking for, and so on and so forth. Here again, I fully, I hope I made it clear before, I respect the concern and the danger involved, but it's one whole tradition. Now, it's my argument that that is the tradition that's won out, even though, paradoxically enough, if you look on the back of your sheet, the Ramah, who of course adds to the Shulchan Aruch and has now become the central to the Shulchan Aruch, takes the other tradition, which Yosef Karo has moved away from, and he brings it all in again. If you look on the Even HaEzer, in paragraph 2, in the capital letters are of Yosef Karo, the small letters are Ramah. He may do with his wife whatever he wants, meaning any form of sexuality is permitted. We won't get into the issue of his language, it sounds very male controlled. It is, of course, a patriarchal society. Have intercourse any time that he desires, may kiss any organ that he desires, may have intercourse naturally or unnaturally, meaning not just genital, but anal, oral, and every other version that you may come up with. Again, provided there's no wasting of I don't want to get distracted. My point is, what's the theology or the psychology behind a ruling that says, of course, this is a side question, which took me 30 years after I graduated, long after I was maybe with the daughter probably, but they're saying the opposite. And I was taught it and studied it like it's one statement and it's all, okay, anyway, that's another story. What's the theology behind Rabbi's position? Well, the answer is obvious, right? What it's saying is that sexuality is positive, affirmative, it's natural, every form is natural, and it's a way of expressing yourself, and it's a legitimate way of expressing at any time, any place in this kind of relationship. Because it will make the relationship better, it will make it more pleasurable, it will make it more fulfilling, it will make it stronger. So my point is, here are two traditions available to us now as modern Orthodox Jews with a contemporary sexual life. Well, you get my application, of course, of this principle. In my judgment, the Karo tradition has won out. and long before our community, but the organization is sort of completed that time. What do I mean by it? The Torah has midah, that there's a withdrawal from sexuality when the woman has a menstrual period. Fair enough. One could interpret this like Rabbi Meir does, right? Rabbi Meir says, you know why the Torah says shenida? Because they get used to each other. It gets routine, it gets boring. So the Torah says, let them withdraw from each other, and after the Shedem they resume again. It's like the wedding night. It's fresh again. I would love to believe that. That is, in fact, I have tried to convince people who practice Torah that this is the point. But that's in the Torah. That's from onset of menstruation a week. Right? In the times of the Talmud, that was pretty much doubled from the time of the bleeding stops till 7 days of counting the kiyum, of counting that there's no bleeding. So you've now gone from 7 days a month to 12 to 14 days a month. Now, what do you do after the 12, 14 days? Again, Parashat Shmachah, but again, number one is they built into the 14 days or the 12 days a set of harchakot. Again, you all have studied it if you were studying for smicha. But those harchakot have, what are they? They basically figure out any possible way in which this person will drop their guard and may lead to sexual contact and close it off, make sure it won't happen so they will not. And what's gone wrong, of course, is, I want to point to Rabbi Akiva's point, because the Gemara mentions that the earliest Canaan wanted to prohibit her to have any cosmetics during this period, also because it makes it look more attractive and maybe it leads to mixed dancing. They don't want to, Rabbi Akiva says, you came to this kind of balance, you've lost your mind. There's a balance. The balance is to make sure that they don't have sexual activity or withdrawing this period. But the other half of balance is that she remain and he remain attractive, available, a real sense. This is, and my point is, the Hakakot show that the community basically lost that balance and is sort of obsessed, is the really correct word, with making sure they don't have any contact as against making sure that they keep, that this has not become a period of loss of personal. It does not become a period of withdrawal. It does not become a period of, in fact, ideally it should be, I don't have sex, I have other ways of coming closer to you. But the point is the community has lost that balance. And the final example I gave, of course, is one of the techniques here again. I mean, again, I haven't done a survey, but clearly, and Professor Kara says so, ideally you don't have any sexuality other than standard genital. You don't have any foreplay. You don't have, in other words, these are all ways, Professor Kara was always saying, for example, again, he cites the Gemara. The partners do not uncover. Nudity is wrong because, again, in fact, his ideal is that they only uncovered enough of her to be able to complete the intercourse, but everything else is covered. And in fact, as you uncover this, you cover as Massachusetts. Again, with all due respect, because it comes back to what's the definition of tzniut. The definition of tzniut is, since sex is this dangerous animal lurking, tzniut is that you hide, the woman hides her sexual attraction. Or that's what tzniut is. Or she does not show her beauty or physical attraction publicly. I would argue that this is the point. What tzniut and Tzalem Elokim is about is that I show myself in relationship to the person and how close I am to them. That the more I know the person, the more I show myself. That's just the reality of all true relationships. And in fact, the more I'm related, the more I show, and I want to show, and I want to cover. The truth is, I'm on my best behavior when it's a friend. It's only my wife that I can show what a rotten I really am, because I know that she'll love me anyway, or she'll forgive me, whatever. So it's a paradox, but that's what. So what tznius is really about is showing appropriately to the moment. Yes. So frankly, if the sex star or porn star shows everything to a total stranger, it's really not a question. It's not really. It's a lie because it's not expressing. I have no secrets from you. I know you. You know me totally. It's the opposite. It's commercialization and a false representation of what the person really is. So pornography. Okay. Anyway, you get the main point. My point is that to practice this kind of sexual ethic would take a very serious attempt to create or generate a culture that takes this tradition, this second tradition, if you will, and tries to carry it through in all its practices. And here again, frankly, right now, the non-Orthodox community, as I say, it's got Haredi theology, and therefore the notion that we would have an authority, say, to go back to a D'Oraisa 7-day period, or we'd have the authority to overrule the Shulchan Aruch and say, showing yourself to your husband, to your spouse, is in fact legitimate, and it's a very powerful part of the connection that's unique to the two of you. It's a very special aspect of yourself. You have nothing to hide. You're the person. Right now, my community does not believe that Rabbi, we have the authority to say those kind of things as against the other. My argument is, that's why I'm arguing we need to create a sexual ethic, because my argument is we're part of a breed. The breed was heading forward, always wanted to head for an ideal and perfect reality, and I would argue that in this reality, like Rav Kook has this very famous passage where he says, in the earlier stage, the reason we have so many chumras and so many restrictions is because human nature has not been cultivated, not developed enough. But he argues that as we improve human nature, as we develop a more humane culture, that now the focus should be on the Torah, what can be done in sex, what it can be expressed in sex, what can be expressed in affirmation rather than restriction. So the affirmation is rather restriction would be the goal. What else can I say to carry this? One last point, and of course, because it's ridiculous to leave it for the last point. But the question again becomes singles. But of course, my answer on the question of singles is very simple. Again, the Haredi community understands it's very difficult, emotionally and physically, and every other way difficult. You have these hormones, and you have them from 15 on, and now, so their answer is very obvious. Marry them off at 16, 17, 18. And that will remove the Yitz Greenberg. And that's correct. It doesn't deal, however, with our reality, which is that the woman, and for that matter, the man in this case, had not yet done their graduate school and not done their professional development, and they need that. That is an important part of their life, and therefore they're not in position to, or already shouldn't. That's before we get to the emotional question, that in fact in this society at 18 you're not really fully mature, and that the divorce rates among 18-year-olds is a lot higher than it is among 22 or 28-year-olds. So that it becomes part of the same issue, it seems to me. So what's our alternative? So my answer is, in some realistic, honest way. So I want to refer to an article by Tzvi Zohar about Pilagish, where he argues, I think, shows very substantially, that a substantial body of the Rishonim affirmed the legitimacy, the morality, the legitimacy, and the halachic acceptability of what he calls, what is called Pilagish. Now, I don't accept the medieval version of Pilagish, because Pilagish basically was, men could afford at least a woman on the side. And in this case, maybe they were not married. They really have they were married. But the idea of a woman who, and this is the key to Pilagish, it's a committed relationship, so that she at that time is engaged with no one else. Now again, part of the improvement of halacha and of the community, I think it's a two-way street, not a one-way street, but for the moment to deal with her. So the point is that it's not a promiscuous relationship, but it's a committed one, it's a serious one. Why am I mentioning that? All I'm saying is that I'm saying that the community, I think, should face the reality that singles, it's part of growth and it's part of developing the capacity to become married, if that's your goal, and to create a family. You need to have room for some expression, whether it be of milder or gentle forms of this, or whether they need to have up to and including serious relationships that may involve full intercourse and so on. My answer is that the community should be, in some honest way, trying to deal with this and say, yes, there's a big difference between casual or hookup and between something that in the course of a serious relationship that's trying to develop that may become more intense. So again, sorry to leave it in such an abrupt way, but my argument is that this is why this is my final point, that the community, that its rabbis, that its poskim, have to really stop and ask, can we show a sexual ethic that's in the real world? Because, of course, right now we're not, but as I'm sure many of you know, the truth is there's a lot of evidence that a lot of it we're not describing and something to explore is really being done by people without guidance, without anything. So in the end, you end up with anything goes. I'm arguing far from anything goes. This could be a guideline for turning the maturation process into a growth process. That process of moral and personal growth would be a model not just for the Orthodox community, but for our community.
Thanks so much, Rabbi. Yes. Thanks so much, Rabbi Yitz, and a lot to think about. We want to thank all of our speakers, all of our educators today, all of our attendees. We want to thank Rabbi Sarna for opening up the Bronfman Center to us at a discounted rate. I want to thank Reb Mati. Reb Mati was involved with our advertising and our food and our recording. Everyone here. Can I see hands? Can we do a quick Ma'ariv? Would folks be willing to daven a quick Ma'ariv? Okay, looks like most. Okay, hopefully we can get a quick Ma'ariv together right here. And thank you all for joining us. Please give us feedback. We want to do more Torat Chayim learning with us. We have a Facebook page. You can follow us there. Thank you. Have a great day. Oh, yeah. Good.